Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. Clara stood in the middle of the luxurious hotel lobby, her breath shallow, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The marble floor beneath her feet gleamed in the dim lighting, its smooth surface almost mocking the turmoil within her. The grandeur of the space was overwhelming, chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting soft pools of light onto the pristine walls. But none of it mattered now. None of it could drown out the voice that had just cut through her like a knife. "Excuse me, ma'am." The hotel manager's tone was sharp, unyielding. His perfectly tailored suit barely moved as he walked toward her, his expression one of barely contained frustration. "We cannot accommodate you. You'll have to leave." Clara blinked, her mind scrambling to understand what was happening. She looked at him, trying to make sense of his words, but her mouth went dry. She had just spent every last penny she had to secure a night in this hotel. She had saved for months, hoping for one evening of peace in a place like this, a place where no one knew her. A place where she could just breathe. Instead, she was being dismissed as if she didn't matter. Her grip on the purse in her hand tightened. It wasn't much. In fact, it was barely more than a cheap bag she'd bought at a thrift store. The old leather had frayed around the edges, and she could feel the weight of all the years it had carried her through. But it was hers. It had become a symbol of her struggle. It felt like everything she had worked for had just been reduced to a simple mistake, a poor decision in choosing the wrong hotel. "I'm sorry." Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. "But I booked a room here. I've paid for it." The manager's gaze didn't soften. "There must have been some mistake. Your reservation doesn't meet the hotel's standards. You're not the type of guest we usually accommodate." The words hit her like a slap in the face. She opened her mouth to protest, but the man continued, his tone growing colder. "I'm afraid I must insist. You can't stay here. You'll have to leave." She felt heat rise in her cheeks as embarrassment flooded her. The whispers from the few guests who had stopped to watch her started to sting. She could feel their eyes on her, judging, wondering what had gone wrong. It didn't matter that she had paid for the room. It didn't matter that she had every right to be here. What mattered was that she wasn't the right kind of person in their eyes. The manager turned his back to her, speaking to someone else across the room. His words were muffled, but Clara could tell they were about her. She felt the weight of his gaze even before he returned, still indifferent. But then, the door to the lobby opened with a quiet creak, and the air seemed to shift. Clara's eyes snapped toward the figure standing in the doorway, framed by the light that spilled into the lobby from outside. Her breath hitched in her throat. The man who stood there was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored suit that made the hotel manager's own attire look cheap. His presence was immediate and powerful, like he had stepped out of another world entirely. He looked like someone who belonged here, no, someone who owned it. His dark hair was slicked back in a way that suggested he didn't care about the effort it took. His posture was flawless, radiating control. But it was the look in his eyes that made Clara freeze. There was something in the way he moved, a quiet confidence that left no room for doubt. "Is there a problem here, Daniel?" the man asked, his voice calm, deep, and impossibly smooth. The hotel manager, whose name Clara hadn't even known until then, stammered, his usual composure shattering. His face paled slightly, and he took a half-step back. "Mr. Stone, I didn't realize. I was just..." Daniel's words faltered as Mr. Stone's gaze shifted from him to Clara. In that moment, everything else in the room seemed to disappear. Clara felt as though she had become the focus of the entire hotel. The man's piercing eyes narrowed, and she could almost hear the questions forming in his mind. She tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. I don't know what's going on." Mr. Stone didn't seem to hear her. He stepped forward, his shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. His every movement was precise, calculated, and deliberate. The rest of the room seemed to recede as he came closer to her. Clara. He said her name with such certainty, such cold recognition, that it sent a shiver down her spine. The way he said it didn't sound like someone who had just met her. It sounded like someone who knew her. Her mind went blank. Clara? Who was he? How did he know her name? The manager looked between them, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Stone, I'm sorry, but I must insist. She doesn't meet our standards. Mr. Stone turned to face the manager with a look that could freeze water. The temperature in the room dropped. I said, he repeated, his voice much colder now, is there a problem? Daniel's eyes widened, his lips pressing into a thin line. No problem, sir. Of course, no problem. He practically bowed out of the conversation, backing away as if the weight of Mr. Stone's gaze had physically pushed him. Clara's legs felt weak as the man, Mr. Stone, turned back to her. His eyes softened just slightly, but there was something more behind them. Something deeper. And for a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something, compassion? Recognition? It was impossible to tell. Come with me, he said, his voice a command wrapped in velvet. No hesitation. No questioning. No room for refusal. She didn't know why, but Clara felt herself nodding. She wanted answers. And in this moment, she didn't trust anyone else in the hotel. The way Mr. Stone looked at her wasn't just a recognition of her, it was almost like he knew something about her. Something she didn't. Something she needed to understand. Without thinking, she followed him toward the elevator. The hum of the elevator doors opening seemed to echo in her mind as she stepped inside, trying to focus on anything other than the storm of emotions that churned within her. Anger, fear, confusion, they all tangled together in a knot of uncertainty. The doors slid closed behind them, and they were alone. The elevator shot upward in silence. Clara stood on one side, her back straight, trying to keep her composure. But Mr. Stone remained unfazed, watching the numbers on the floor indicator without a single glance her way. She wanted to ask him, wanted to shout at him to explain everything. But something stopped her. The longer she stood there in the tense silence, the more she began to feel the weight of this moment. The more she questioned why her life had led to this point. As the elevator ascended, Clara felt an unsettling sense of dread creep over her. There was something she was missing, something she didn't understand yet. When the doors finally opened, the change in atmosphere was immediate. The air was heavier, thicker, the faint scent of expensive wood and leather wafting in. The decor was even more lavish than the lobby. It was like stepping into an entirely different world. Mr. Stone turned to face her. This way, he said, not waiting for her to speak. He led her down the hallway, his pace deliberate, and Clara felt an urgency that made her heart race faster. She wanted to ask him why he knew her name, why he had come to her rescue in a place she had no business being in. But the words stuck in her throat. There was something about the way he moved, about the way he carried himself, that told her she wouldn't be able to handle the answers just yet. And then, as they stopped in front of a door, Clara's heart skipped a beat. Mr. Stone turned to her with a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I believe we have a lot to talk about, Clara. And suddenly, she realized, she had no idea what she was walking into. The door swung open, and the world beyond it was a mystery she hadn't even begun to unravel. The room was vast. Clara had expected a normal hotel suite, but this was nothing like anything she had ever seen. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, the world outside seemed to vanish. The only thing that existed now was this room and the man who stood before her. Mr. Stone didn't speak as he stepped inside, his posture as commanding as ever. Clara felt the pressure of his presence, but she couldn't quite bring herself to ask any of the questions swirling in her mind. Not yet. She had too many, but the fear that had been gnawing at her all evening was now turning into something more unsettling, curiosity. As she stepped into the room, she couldn't help but notice the rich, dark wood paneling that lined the walls, and the velvet curtains that framed the large windows overlooking the city. The furniture was lavish, sleek leather chairs, a massive marble desk, and a low, ornate table that seemed to have been placed in the center of the room just to exude wealth and power. The soft glow of a chandelier cast a golden hue over everything, making the entire room feel like a space out of another time. But it was the coldness of the room that struck her most. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the atmosphere. There was something off about it, something unwelcoming despite the grandeur. The entire space felt like a carefully constructed illusion, designed to make its occupants feel small, insignificant. And Clara felt it deep in her gut. Mr. Stone didn't look at her as he moved toward a bar in the corner of the room. He poured himself a drink, his movements smooth, calculated. Clara stood by the door, her heart pounding, the events of the evening replaying in her mind over and over. How did he know her? Why had he come to her defense at the hotel? And why had he invited her here, into this strange, unsettling place? She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat. Something told her that asking too many questions too soon wouldn't do her any good. But she couldn't just stand there forever. "Why did you bring me here?" she finally asked, her voice coming out quieter than she had intended. Mr. Stone didn't immediately answer. He took a sip of his drink and set the glass down with a soft clink, his eyes never leaving her. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost too calm. "Because I wanted to." He paused, studying her with an intensity that made Clara's skin crawl. "Because you were meant to be here. Whether you understand it or not, Clara, you've been part of this for longer than you realize." His words made her blood run cold. What did he mean? What was he talking about? "I don't understand," she murmured, more to herself than to him. She shook her head, trying to process the weight of his statement. She had no idea what he was referring to. What part of what? What did she have to do with him or this hotel? Mr. Stone smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It was as if he was watching her struggle, waiting for her to catch up to something she didn't even know existed. "You've been a part of this story from the beginning, Clara. The hotel, your life, everything. It's all connected," he said, his tone steady, as if he were explaining something that should have been obvious to her. Clara's mind reeled. She wasn't sure whether to be scared or angry. This man, this stranger, was speaking to her like they shared some secret she wasn't privy to. She wanted to scream at him, demand that he tell her everything, but something kept her still. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like he could see into the very core of her being. Maybe it was the feeling that if she pushed him too hard, she might never get the answers she was seeking. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. She had to know. She couldn't leave without understanding who he really was. Mr. Stone finally turned toward her, his eyes narrowing slightly. There was a brief flicker of something almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make Clara's heart skip a beat. "Who am I?" he repeated, almost as if savoring the question. He took another sip of his drink before speaking again. "I suppose I'm someone who understands the way things work in this world. I've learned to navigate it, to control it." He looked out the window for a moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice was almost a whisper, like he was revealing a secret, but just loud enough for Clara to hear. "And I've learned to control people, too." Clara's pulse quickened, her eyes widening. She took a cautious step back, her mind racing. Control people? What was he talking about? This wasn't just a hotel manager. He was something else entirely. "You control people," she repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. "What does that even mean?" Mr. Stone turned back to her, his gaze piercing, as if he was deciding whether or not to answer her question. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of his words hanging between them. "I make things happen," he said finally, his voice low and measured. "I make things unfold in the way I want them to." Clara felt the floor beneath her feet shift. Her head spun as she tried to process what he was saying. This wasn't just some random interaction, some chance meeting. This man, this Mr. Stone, had orchestrated everything. From the moment she had walked into the hotel, he had been pulling the strings. But why? What did he want from her? She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could get a word out, there was a soft knock on the door. Mr. Stone's eyes flicked toward the door, his expression unreadable. Clara felt her chest tighten. Who could be knocking now? He didn't move immediately. Instead, he glanced at her once more, his gaze assessing, like he was deciding whether or not she was ready for whatever was about to happen next. "You should sit down," he said softly, motioning to one of the chairs by the window. "There's someone you need to meet." Clara didn't want to sit. She didn't want to be here, in this strange place, surrounded by secrets that made her feel like a pawn in a game she didn't understand. But there was nowhere to run, and every instinct in her told her that this was a moment she couldn't miss. If she left now, she might never get the answers she was searching for. Reluctantly, she moved toward the chair, sitting down slowly, her eyes never leaving Mr. Stone. He walked toward the door, opened it just a crack, and spoke softly to someone outside. When he turned back to Clara, his face was unreadable, but his eyes gleamed with something she couldn't quite place. "Stay here. I'll be right back," he said, his tone final. Clara nodded, though her mind was racing with 100 different thoughts. She had no idea what was happening. No idea what this man wanted with her. But one thing was certain, she was deep into something she didn't fully understand. And there was no going back now. As Mr. Stone disappeared down the hallway, Clara was left alone in the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel her legs trembling, and she had to remind herself to breathe. Something was coming. She could feel it. But what? And why her? The silence in the room felt suffocating. Clara sat there, her fingers tightly clutching the arms of the chair, trying to calm her racing heartbeat. Every moment seemed to stretch into eternity, the weight unbearable. She glanced nervously around the room, as if the opulent surroundings would somehow offer her a clue, a way out, but there was nothing. The luxurious furniture, the expensive artwork on the walls, it all seemed to mock her in this moment of uncertainty. Everything felt like an illusion. Her mind kept replaying the words Mr. Stone had said earlier. "I control people." She couldn't stop thinking about it. What did he mean by that? How could anyone control people? Was he just a powerful businessman with too much influence, or was there something more to him? Something darker? The thought sent a chill down her spine. The knock at the door echoed again, breaking her from her spiraling thoughts. Her breath caught in her throat. She stood, slowly, trying to steady herself. The knock was softer this time, deliberate, almost as if it were a signal, a cue for her to prepare herself for what was coming next. She took a deep breath and moved toward the door, her steps hesitant but purposeful. She knew she couldn't avoid whatever was about to happen. There was no escaping this man, this situation, anymore. Not if she wanted answers. She had already crossed a line when she entered the hotel, and now there was no turning back. The door opened slowly, and Clara stepped back, her pulse quickening. A tall woman stood in the doorway, her face half shadowed by the dim light in the hallway. Her sharp features were framed by dark hair, which cascaded in loose waves down her shoulders. She was dressed in a black dress, simple but elegant, and she held herself with the kind of quiet confidence that made Clara take an immediate step back. Something about her presence was unsettling, there was no warmth, no invitation in her eyes. Only coldness. The woman didn't speak at first. She simply looked at Clara, her gaze piercing, as though she were sizing her up, judging her in some way Clara couldn't yet comprehend. After a long moment, the woman stepped forward, closing the door behind her. "Clara," the woman said, her voice smooth, almost too calm. "We need to talk." Clara's throat tightened. She had so many questions, but she couldn't seem to find her voice. She glanced over at the chair she had been sitting in, and then back at the woman, but before she could speak, the woman raised a hand, silencing her. "Sit down," the woman said. It wasn't a request. Clara hesitated but obeyed. She lowered herself into the chair once more, her hands trembling slightly as they rested in her lap. The woman sat opposite her, crossing her legs with effortless grace. "I'm Isabel," the woman said, her eyes never leaving Clara's. "And I have a lot to explain to you." Clara could feel her heart racing in her chest. There were so many things she didn't understand. So many things she needed to know. But one question burned hotter than all the others. "Why am I here?" Clara asked, the words slipping out of her before she could stop them. "Why did Mr. Stone bring me here? What's going on?" Isabel's lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Stone brought you here because you're part of something bigger. Something much bigger than you realize." She leaned in slightly, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "And now you're in the center of it." Clara blinked, the words not making sense. "I don't understand. I was just trying to get a room at the hotel. I don't even know who Mr. Stone is." Isabel studied her for a moment, her eyes narrowing as if measuring Clara's sincerity. Then, she exhaled slowly, almost like she was disappointed. "That's the problem, Clara," Isabel said softly. "You don't know. And that's why you're here." Clara shook her head, frustration building inside her. "You're not making sense. What am I supposed to be a part of? What is all of this?" Isabel sighed, her expression softening just a little. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping gently on the armrest. "You've been chosen," she said finally. "You're here because you're part of a plan. A plan that's been in motion for years." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She felt like the floor had just been ripped out from under her. A plan? What plan? Why me? Isabel's smile faded, replaced by a cold seriousness. "You've been involved in this for much longer than you think. Your life, your choices, they've all led to this moment. Everything you've done, every decision you've made, has been part of the plan." Clara felt dizzy, the room spinning as the weight of Isabel's words sank in. She tried to hold on to the thread of reality, but it was slipping through her fingers. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling now. "I don't know who you are. I don't know who Mr. Stone is. I just needed a place to stay." Isabel's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in her gaze. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't know. You thought you could escape your life, your struggles. You thought you could just hide away in this hotel and pretend everything was fine. But everything you've done, every step you've taken, has been leading you here. It's too late for you to turn back now." Clara felt her chest tighten. Her mind raced as she tried to piece everything together, but nothing made sense. How could this be happening? She was just a woman trying to survive, trying to live a normal life. How could she have been part of something so much bigger than her? "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask for any of this." Isabel's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained hard. "I know," she said. "But sometimes, we don't get to choose. Sometimes, the choices are made for us." Clara's breath hitched in her chest. The words felt like a punch to her gut, knocking the wind out of her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure, she was no longer in control. The illusion of her life, her choices, was shattering around her. Isabel continued, her voice dropping even lower now. You're not the first. There have been others before you. And there will be others after you. People like you, people who don't know they're part of something much larger. But it's all part of a system. A system that Mr. Stone controls. Clara felt the room closing in around her. Her mind raced with a million questions, but only one thing kept surfacing. Why me? She asked again, this time more desperately. What do you want from me? Isabel's eyes gleamed with something that could have been pity, or perhaps amusement. That's the question, isn't it? She said softly. You were chosen because of your potential. Because you are capable of surviving in a world that most people would crumble under. You're strong, Clara. Stronger than you know. But the real question is, what are you willing to sacrifice to understand the truth? Clara's heart raced as she tried to digest her words. The truth? What truth? She didn't know what Isabel was talking about, but she felt as if something vital was slipping away from her, like a part of her soul was being pulled into a place she couldn't follow. Before she could speak again, the door creaked open. Mr. Stone entered the room, his expression unreadable. His gaze flicked from Isabel to Clara, and the air in the room seemed to shift, thickening with unspoken tension. You're ready now, Mr. Stone said, his voice commanding. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but she couldn't form the words. Isabel had just told her everything, everything she had feared. She was part of something. But what? The room felt like it was closing in, and Clara realized she was no longer just a bystander. She was an active player in a game she didn't understand. And the rules? Those were still unknown. Clara's hands shook as she stared at Isabel, who remained silent, her eyes piercing through her as if she were trying to read the very depths of her soul. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating and impossible to ignore. You're part of something bigger than you realize, Isabel had said. Clara's mind scrambled to process what had just been revealed. Her entire life felt like it was unraveling, the threads of reality slowly loosening. She had come to the hotel looking for nothing more than a safe place to rest, a temporary escape from the noise and chaos of her life. But now? Now, she was trapped in a world that didn't make sense. Everything she had known felt like a lie, and the truth was something far darker, far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The room was suffocating. The opulent furniture, the velvet curtains, and the polished marble floor were no longer comforting. They felt like the backdrop to a story she was no longer in control of. As if someone, or something, was pulling the strings, and she was just a pawn in their game. Why? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know who she was asking, Isabel, Mr. Stone, the universe itself. Why me? What do you want from me? Isabel didn't immediately respond. She merely studied Clara with cold, calculating eyes, as if she were waiting for something to shift. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but carrying an unsettling weight. You were chosen, Clara. You don't remember, but you were chosen for a reason. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Chosen? She wasn't special. She was just a woman trying to make her way in the world, someone who had dealt with enough hardships to last a lifetime. But chosen? She felt like she was losing her grip on reality. Chosen for what? Clara asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. For what purpose? Isabel leaned forward, her gaze never leaving Clara's face. That's something you'll have to figure out for yourself. But I can tell you this much, you're more capable than you think. You've survived things most people would break under. And that resilience, it's what makes you valuable. Clara shook her head, still not understanding. Resilience? I'm not. I'm not special. I'm just trying to survive. Just like anyone else. Isabel's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't one of kindness. It was more of a knowing smile, the kind someone gives you when they know something you don't. That's where you're wrong, Clara. You are special. The choices you've made, the way you've handled every obstacle in your life, it's all part of the bigger picture. Clara felt a cold sweat form on the back of her neck. She wanted to get up, to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She was trapped. Both physically and mentally. The walls of the room seemed to close in on her, and every breath felt harder to take. But just as Clara thought she might break, the door opened. Mr. Stone walked into the room, his presence filling the space like an imposing shadow. He didn't look at her directly, instead focusing on Isabel. Is she ready? Mr. Stone's voice was calm, too calm, as though this were all part of a routine he had been through many times before. Isabel nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Clara's. She's more ready than she thinks. Clara looked between the two of them, her mind racing. Ready? Ready for what? What was happening? Was she supposed to just accept everything they were telling her? That she had been chosen? That her life wasn't her own? It was too much. She needed answers. She needed clarity. Clara, Mr. Stone said, his voice suddenly softer, more personal. He took a step toward her, his eyes locking with hers. You have a role to play. You're part of something much bigger than this hotel, bigger than your life as you know it. The sooner you accept that, the sooner we can move forward. Clara's breath hitched. Part of something bigger? Her life wasn't her own. She felt like she was drowning in their words, in their manipulation. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but what could she do? She was alone. Move forward, she repeated, her voice rising. What does that even mean? You're not telling me anything. You're just saying words. Words that don't make any sense. Mr. Stone remained unfazed, his expression unreadable. You'll understand soon enough, he said, turning away. You've been trained for this, Clara. Everything you've experienced in your life, every hardship you've endured, it's been preparing you for what's to come. Clara stood up suddenly, the chair scraping against the floor. No. I won't accept this, she snapped, her voice filled with defiance. You can't control me. You can't just tell me I have a role to play and expect me to go along with it. Isabel stood as well, her eyes narrowed. You're not in control here, Clara. Not anymore. You never were. The words hit her like a slap, the truth of them sinking deep into her chest. She had never been in control. Not in this hotel, not in her life. Everything had been orchestrated by forces she couldn't comprehend. And now, she was standing on the edge of something she didn't understand, something she couldn't escape. You'll learn, Isabel continued, her voice like a whisper, yet somehow loud enough to fill the entire room. You'll learn that there's a price to pay for survival. The question is, Clara, what are you willing to sacrifice? Clara's knees felt weak, but she didn't sit down. She stood there, trying to summon the strength to demand more answers, to force them to tell her everything. But it was useless. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the feeling that they were right. She was part of something she didn't understand, and the more she resisted, the more she seemed to fall deeper into their grip. Mr. Stone turned to Isabel, his gaze sharp. It's time, he said, his voice suddenly harsh. She needs to meet him now. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Who? Who do I need to meet? Isabel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, which she handed to Clara. The envelope was thick, sealed with dark wax. There was no name on it, no address, just a simple, cold seal. What's this? Clara asked, holding the envelope in her trembling hands. Open it, Isabel said simply. Clara hesitated. She didn't want to open it. What if it was another part of the game they were playing? What if it was just another lie, another manipulation? But her curiosity won out. With shaking fingers, she broke the seal and pulled out the letter inside. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, and unmistakably familiar. Her heart lurched as she read the words. Clara, I've been waiting for you. The time has come. You've been chosen, and now you will understand why. You've always known the truth. Now, it's time to face it. You can't run anymore. The letter ended there. No signature, no explanation, just an invitation. An invitation that seemed like a final ultimatum. Clara felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. What was going on? She looked up at Isabel and Mr. Stone, her mind spinning. Who wrote this? Isabel's smile was cold. Someone you've known longer than you think. Someone who has been watching you. Clara felt her blood run cold. The letter, the tone, it all seemed too personal, too ominous. She wanted to scream, to run, to escape from everything, but she was trapped. Trapped in a world where the truth was out of her reach, and all she could do was follow the path they had set for her. We can't wait much longer, Mr. Stone said, his voice sharp. It's time for you to meet him. Clara didn't know who he was talking about, but she knew one thing for sure: whatever was happening, whatever she was caught in, it was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And there was no way out. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the grand hallway, the faint echo of Mr. Stone and Isabel's footsteps ringing in her ears. The letter she had just read weighed heavily in her hands. You've always known the truth. Now, it's time to face it. You can't run anymore. The words seemed to mock her, their meaning still unclear but increasingly unsettling. What truth? And who had written that letter? There was something so familiar about it, something so unsettlingly personal that she couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched, even now. Mr. Stone stopped in front of a tall, ornate door. He didn't glance back at her, but Clara could see his broad shoulders tense, the weight of whatever was about to happen pressing down on him. He turned the handle slowly, the door creaking open with an eerie groan. He stepped aside to let Clara through. After you, he said, his voice cold and distant. Clara swallowed hard. Her mind screamed at her to run, to turn away, to leave this hotel behind and never look back. But her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The letter, the ominous warnings, the cryptic words, they had all led to this moment. There was no escaping it now. With a trembling breath, she stepped forward and entered the room. It was dimly lit, the only light coming from a single chandelier that hung low in the center. The walls were covered in dark, rich tapestries that seemed to absorb the light, giving the space an almost suffocating atmosphere. But it wasn't the decor that caught her attention, it was the man sitting at the large wooden desk at the far end of the room. He was facing away from her, his back straight, his posture commanding. A slight chill ran down Clara's spine as she recognized him. The man in the photograph. The one she had never forgotten, even though she had no memory of him. Clara, the man said, his voice deep and smooth, a cold edge to it that sent a shiver down her spine. He turned slowly in his chair to face her, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that was almost too much to bear. I've been waiting for you. Clara froze. Her heart lurched in her chest. She couldn't breathe. It wasn't just his face, it was something else. Something about the way he looked at her, as though he had been waiting for this moment for years, as though this moment was inevitable. You, she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. I know you. But how? The man smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who was happy to see her. It was cold, calculated. You've always known me, Clara. The question is, why don't you remember? Clara took a step back, her pulse quickening. What do you mean? I've never seen you before in my life. He stood up slowly, his movement deliberate. He was tall, much taller than Mr. Stone, and his presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. He wore a dark suit, impeccably tailored, the kind that demanded respect. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They were intense, piercing, like they could see right through her. You were a child when we last met, he said, his voice soft but carrying an undeniable power. You don't remember, but we were connected. In ways you can't possibly understand. Clara's chest tightened. What do you want from me? She demanded, her voice shaking. Why are you doing this? Why me? He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. What you want doesn't matter, Clara. The question is, what are you willing to accept? Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. I'm not part of your game, she said, her voice fierce. I'm not some pawn for you to use. He stopped in front of her, too close for comfort, his presence overwhelming. You never were a pawn, Clara. You were the key. Clara's mind spun. The key? To what? To everything? To the life she had been living? To whatever twisted conspiracy had ensnared her? She could feel the walls closing in on her, her breath shallow. She needed to understand, but no words came. She needed answers, but every time she asked, the truth felt farther out of reach. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object, something that glinted in the dim light. It was a key, small and silver, with intricate engravings along the shaft. He held it up between them, letting it catch the light. This, he said softly, is the key to everything. The key to the truth you've been searching for. Clara stared at it, her mind still reeling from everything he had said. The truth, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. What truth? The truth about who you are. The truth about why you were chosen. The truth about why your life has always been tied to this moment. The words hung in the air like a curse. Clara felt the weight of them pressing down on her, suffocating her. The truth? What truth was he talking about? How could she trust him? She didn't know him, and yet everything about him felt so familiar, so unsettlingly close. You're lying, she said, her voice cracking. You're just trying to manipulate me. Make me believe something that isn't real. He smiled again, and this time it was different. There was no cruelty in it, no malice, just a strange kind of sadness. I'm not lying, Clara. Everything I've told you is the truth. And deep down, you know it. Clara's heart raced. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, the heat rising in her chest. What did he mean by all of this? Why did he think she was part of it? Why did he think she had chosen to be part of whatever dark secret they were hiding? Stop, she said, the word coming out with more force than she had expected. I don't care about your lies. I don't care about your games. I want out. I want to go home. He regarded her with a look of quiet understanding. You are home, Clara. You just don't know it yet. Her chest tightened, panic rising. She turned to Mr. Stone, her eyes pleading for some kind of answer, some sign that this wasn't real, that she wasn't truly trapped in this nightmare. But he remained silent, his gaze unreadable. The man with the key stepped closer, so close that Clara could feel the heat of his body against hers. You were born into this, Clara. You were born for this. The question isn't whether you will accept your destiny, it's whether you're strong enough to face it. Clara staggered back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Her whole life had been a lie. The woman she thought she was, this quiet, unassuming survivor, had never been who she thought. She wasn't just the simple, struggling woman trying to make it through each day. She was part of something far more dangerous. Something bigger than she could comprehend. Her mind flashed back to the photograph she had seen earlier, the one with the man she hadn't recognized but somehow knew. The photo that had started it all. It was a reminder, a clue, but it hadn't made sense until now. "You've been running from this for years, Clara," the man said softly. "But it's time for you to stop." "No," she whispered, her hands trembling. "No, I won't accept it. I don't care who you are, or what you think you've chosen me for. I won't be your pawn. I won't." "You already are," he said, cutting her off. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was a coldness to it that chilled her to the bone. "And you always have been." The key glinted in his hand, and Clara could see her future locked behind it. Whatever this was, this web of secrets, lies, and manipulations, it had always been her fate. The moment she had stepped into this hotel, her life had changed forever. There was no going back. And the truth, as terrifying as it was something she would have to face. The silence between them stretched, heavy and unyielding. Clara didn't know what to say, or if she should say anything at all. There were no more words to speak. Her life had led her here. To this moment. To this terrifying, inexplicable truth. And there was no escaping it.